What is happening in there? Gaming Dude here, and I got this video idea from Paul from Team APS. He kind of did a similar video around what the Yu-Gi-Oh's Power 9 would be, and so just to provide a bit of background, Power 9 in Magic is slang for 9 of the best cards in the game, just without contest, fundamentally broken cards that exist within the card game and likely are limited in use or just outright forbidden at times. So I figured I would go through and actually talk about what I would consider to be the 9, or rather the Power 9 of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I figured I'd get the obvious one out of the way first, starting off with Pot of Greed. The one card where nobody knows what it does, and so from what I can tell, I think we can just split it up into 3 words. So its effect is draw 2 cards. It's funny how, like, in the show, all the time they just keep saying, what Pot of Greed does. Just explains it every single time. It was very funny in original Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm surprised not a lot of people know about how fundamentally broken a card is that you can splash into your deck. The ability to draw is an absolutely massive one in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it gives you an additional resource in your hand. And that, with the way in which power creep has worked throughout Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's only gotten more and more powerful as time has gone on because of the ability to special summon as many times as you can. Most games do have some sort of limit in terms of resources. The only resources you have in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the cards in your hand, the cards on your field, but then you can then endlessly begin to start milling cards to your graveyard and using your graveyard as an additional hand, being able to send cards whichever way in order to trigger a domino of effects that work with each other, and that level of synergy is what creates the meta format in more competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! So Pot of Greed is a card that has been banned and likely will never be unbanned. And I mean, the more time passes, the less and less likely that's going to happen. But just another card that is just as, if not more so broken than Pot of Greed, is the next card on this list. So number 2 on my Power 9 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Graceful Charity. Graceful Charity is more broken than Pot of Greed because it can give you more resources. Essentially, you draw 3 cards and you discard 2. And you might think, how's that more broken? You're drawing 3 cards, you're losing 2, so it's +1 in card economy when you really think about it. Well, card neutral actually, now that I think about it, you're actually playing the card Graceful Charity. So you're kind of left with, you draw 3 cards, you lose 3 cards. That's how it works. However, that's not actually the case because it's more of a +4 in card economy, because the cards that you send to the graveyard could actually have graveyard effects, could have floating effects, and all of that can actually benefit you, especially when we're talking about decks like in the current meta we have the Ishizu Terra Elements. Terra Elements love being in the graveyard. So Graceful Charity would be an excessive boon for them. And the thing is that you choose which 2 cards to discard as well. So it's not randomly chosen, you get to choose it. And so that's absolutely an incredible thing. So yeah, the ability to draw, the ability to lose cards that you yourself are able to choose, and it's not randomly picked by any means. That's why milling is usually done from the top of your deck, so that like whatever cards you lose, it's completely random based on just the way in which it was shuffled. Pretty much it, really. Number 3 on my list is another fundamentally broken card that is all 3 of these so far have been like in the game from the very beginning. We're probably talking 2000 to 2002, maybe 2003 at the latest. Delinquent Duo. Pay 1,000 life points. Your opponent discards 1 random card, and if they have any other cards in their hand, discard 1 more card of their choice. Simply put, your opponent loses 2 cards in their hand, given that they have that many cards in their hand, and you only play 1 spell card to make that happen. So you lose 1 card in order for your opponent to lose 2 cards. So the fact that drawing cards is an absolute boon in the game, discarding cards for cost is one of the sort of larger costs in the game, but forcing your opponents to lose those cards is insane. Like, if your opponent loses those cards, there may very well not be a way of being able to for them to play the game. You're outright locking out your opponent from being able to play if they don't have an adequate enough deck that has either recursion or some level of graveyard effects, which might be the only saving grace for your opponent is graveyard effects. And again, with Delinquent Duo, you don't really have a choice in terms of what cards are lost. One is at random that you might pick. You just like, your opponent just pick, brings up their hand but doesn't actually show you the card. You just pick one and that's the one they lose. This would actually be beneficial for people who are playing Tear Elements, because if you're the one playing a Tear Element deck, your opponent plays Delinquent Duo, likely you may end up actually sending cards to the graveyard that you might want in there. So in a way, it's very 50-50, but for the most part, especially decks that don't enjoy having their cards in the graveyard, this can be very, very much detrimental to play and could potentially lock you out of playing the game completely. So Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity are fundamentally broken for how much benefit you can get out of them. Delinquent Duo is pretty much a hit or miss depending on what kind of deck your opponent is playing. Moving on, Last Will is the next one on the list, and this one's an interesting one because it doesn't seem that broken when you really think about it, but it's because of how the game has evolved on that it has become more and more broken. So Last Will is a normal spell card. If a monster is on your side of the field was sent to the graveyard this turn, you can special summon one monster with an attack of 1500 points or less from your deck once during this turn, then shuffle your deck. So the funny thing about this is that there are so many broken monsters with less than 1500 attack. There are a lot of very, very good 0 attack power monsters. And technically, question marks do count as 0 attack. So if you think about just how many monsters there are in the game that are broken, banned, or have, this particular attack point value, whether it be just a question mark or whether it just be 0, it really, you could start comboing off of this card insanely, or Last Will can also be a combo extender for many combo heavy decks that use a lot of low attack decks, especially when you think about cards like Sprites. Sprites are mainly level 2, rank 2, and link 2 monsters. And that's, normally these cards have way less than 1500 attack, or slightly less. But they're within that sort of field of view. And also there's no once per turn. Even if this was legal, at unlimited, you could play 3 of these and actually get through an insane combo out of this, these cards. So the fact that cards not only have graveyard effects, which, say if you use the card to, you lost a monster in some way because of your own card actions, you could then trigger Last Will and go from there as a combo extender. Yeah, Last Will. A very good card for decks that use very low attack power monsters because, like I said, you could really... A lot of low attack power monsters have some very good effects, especially now with how long this card game has been going on for. Next on the list. Now, the next 2 cards on the list can literally be, you can go either or, to be completely honest. So we've got the Forceful Sentry and Confiscation. So the Forceful Sentry, look at your opponent's hand, select one card among them and return it to his or her deck. The deck is then shuffled. So pick a card in your opponent's hand after they've shown you it, and they lose one that goes straight back into the deck. Confiscation, on the other hand, pay 1000 life points, look at your opponent's hand, pay one, select one card, and discard it. So you're forcing your opponent to discard one card. Now, Confiscation and Delinquent Duo have very similar effects in the sense that Delinquent Duo, your opponent loses 2 cards, but you have no control over the card that is picked, or to some extent it's luck heavy, whereas with Confiscation, your opponent loses 1 card and you know exactly what card that is because you're the one that's picking it. On top of that, losing cards isn't the reason why the Forceful, Sentry, and Confiscation for me are on the same level, but the fact that you can see your opponent's hand, which is uncommon and incredibly rare, and you can actually kind of, begin to figure out exactly what your opponent's plays are going to be. You don't need to see the face downs that they've got, just their face up monsters, whatever, field spell or continues spell and traps they have. Looking at their hand is enough. Like, hand knowledge is very, very priceless, I think, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially. So you can figure out exactly what your opponent is up to and be able to come up with an appropriate countermeasure if you have the cards available to you, of course. So there is that. So in terms of like the 5th spot that I've got, either Confiscation or Forceful Sentry, or both if you really want to go there. But the 6th card that I have available here is Imperial Order, and I'm talking about the original Imperial Order, not the errata version. So this card is still banned, and obviously like all of these cards I'm going to be talking about are definitely, banned for good reason. So with Imperial Order, as long as this card remains face up on the field, negate the effect of all magic cards, we'll go with that, pay 700 life points during each of your standby phases. If you cannot, this card is destroyed. So pretty much Imperial Order is a massive floodgate in which neither player? I'm pretty sure it is. Yes. So neither player can play spell cards. And in the original version, the difference between the original and the errata version is that paying the 700 life points is optional. You can choose not to pay it one turn, so you can like pay Imperial Order during your opponent's turn. They get locked out of spell cards for 1 turn. Practically, this card could win you an entire game, but stopping your opponent from playing spell cards completely for that turn. Then it comes to your turn, you can then choose to not pay it, and then you can play all the spell cards that you want. So spell cards are the most powerful and most broken cards in the game. That's why most of the cards so far that I've shown you have practically been spell cards, because you can just play them as is. You don't need to set them, you don't need to wait, you just play them and go. So yeah, Imperial Order was always kind of fundamentally broken, but the option to be able to pay 700 life points, which is a very meager cost for such a powerful effect. Now, in the errata version that we now have, paying 700 life points is non-optional, so you could actually lose the game if you have Imperial Order on the field for too long, but also, in order to get rid of it, you would need to destroy it yourself. So you would actually need to use a monster effect in order to destroy it, or some form of back row removal that isn't a spell card, because its effect will get negated by Imperial Order. So you've got to be mindful about how you use it, but this card is still banned given that errata, which is a big one too. Not, being able to give you the option. Yeah, it says right here, this is not optional. You must pay, so rather than if you can. So there's that. Moving on to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7th card I have on the list, Ultimate Offering. During your main phase or your opponent's battle phase, you can pay 500 life points immediately after this effect resolves. Normal, summon, or set 1 monster. This is a continuous trap. This is also from very much the sort of original group of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Again, I don't think any of the cards so far have been that old, actually. Confiscation, yeah, no, it's all fairly old cards. So in the case of Ultimate Offering, you can summon as many cards as you want, given that they are able to be normal summoned, and you only need to pay 500 life points. If you are able to finish a turn with if you're able to start a turn with a large amount of cards in your hand, you could go in and easily make a lot of what's the word? You can make a lot of different types of like OTKs with this, and 500 life points is such a meager cost. If they did increase the life point value, that could be it. They could stop this card from being used or thought about. The funny thing also about it is that there's no once per turn, so you can use it as many times as you want in a turn, given you have the life points to spare. And that's kind of what makes this card very, very broken. If they added a once per turn on pretty much all of these cards that I've mentioned so far, I think we can admit that maybe they might not have to be banned anymore. I think with the exception of Pot of Greed and possibly Graceful Charity, both of those cards are still so broken that they likely wouldn't even be unbanned, even if it was for a once per turn. But it would be interesting to see how that would go. Again, I think with Yu-Gi-Oh, it's all about the various type of resources that you have, but there isn't any sort of limit when it comes to things like special summoning. Though in the case of Ultimate Offering, it's normal summoning, so the assumption is that you need the monsters in your hand in order to summon, so there is that as well. Moving on, card number 8. The pre-errated version of Chaos Emperor Dragon's Envoy of the End. So this is a monster card, which is special summoned by, and so I'm specifically looking at the original version, which is special summoned by removing from play 1 light and 1 dark monster, and paying, and you can summon it onto the field. It is a beefy boy at 3000 attack and 2500 defense, but at the meager cost of 1000 life points, you can send all the cards in both players' hands and field to the graveyard, and then inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent for every card sent to the graveyard by this effect. And what makes Chaos Emperor Dragon Envoy of the End so very, very broken is that there's no once per turn on the effect, which is one of the key things that I think most games, most broken cards generally tend to not have in their descriptions, but also it is a key combo piece and one of the most broken not even OTKs, one of the most broken ways to beat an opponent ever made in all of Yu-Gi-Oh, which was the Yada lock. Essentially, you would have Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End, on the field. You'd activate its effect to destroy all cards, and hopefully among the cards that you've got on your side of the field will either be a Sangan or a Witch of the Black Forest, and either of these cards will allow you to be able to get a Yatagarasu on the field or in your hand. I guess it depends on which card you use. And Yatagarasu is a dark spirit monster, spirit monster, level 2, has about 300 attack, I want to say, but every time Yatagarasu attacks your opponent directly, they cannot draw a card during the next draw phase. So it just skips their next draw phase. And so they get locked out of playing the game completely because your opponent has lost all the cards on their side of the field, all the cards in their hand, and if they have no cards in their hand and they can't draw a card because of the effect of a bird that keeps attacking them directly, they fundamentally cannot play the game because they cannot draw a card, therefore they just lose. It is still one of the most brutal ways to beat an opponent because it does take a lot of direct attacks in order to actually stop your opponent from being able to do that. And what makes Yatagarasu... so Yatagarasu did get banned and is now no longer banned, but what made the card interesting was it was a spirit card. So spirit cards get sent back into your hand after they've been, summoned, whatever turn it may have been. Spirits are unfortunately one of the least used cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of the spirit detriment, as I like to call it. So yeah, that's an interesting way to be able to beat an opponent, and likely this card will never be it could possibly be unbanned, but the original version, under no circumstances would it be banned. So that's, yeah. I think at this point now, send as many cards in both players' hands and field also very good. Yeah. Wow, this card got errated a lot. Interesting. Well, anyway, So that is card number 8, I think. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8. And then card number 9 that I've got is a monster card, Magical Scientist. So Magical Scientist is an interesting card. So Magical Scientist is a dark effect monster that's one star. Is a spellcaster and has 300 attack and defense. Its effect is that you pay 1,000 life points to special summon one level 6 or lower fusion monster from your fusion deck in face-up attack or defense position. That fusion monster cannot attack your opponent's life points directly and is returned to your fusion deck at the end of the turn. So you think that the effect of not being able to attack your opponent and also being sent back to your fusion deck would be a bit of a detriment at the cost of 1,000 life points. So 1,000 life points, firstly, is such a low cost for the amount of value you're going to be able to get out of being able to summon fusion monsters from your fusion deck. So what is currently now referred to as the extra deck used to be known as the fusion deck. So all of these cards, I think we can fundamentally say, are all very, very old. Actually, are they? Yeah. Yep, they're all very, very old cards. So at the end of the day, it's got some interesting wording on it, which kind of makes it fundamentally broken, in the case of this one being 1,000 life points. Now, as far as fusion summoning monsters, the thing is that Magical Scientists now would definitely be referring to the fusion deck as the extra deck, and on top of that, you'll be able to fusion summon any monsters and then be able to either link off or synchro off or just be able to use its effects. The fact that the monster's effects are not negated is probably the most broken part of this card, and I think that, like, if you did have Magical Scientist, I think the only way to make it legal is either to increase the life point cost, whereby you only have 100 life points left in order to use the effect, or something along the lines of, say, a once per turn in addition to an insane life point increase cost, or that, you know, the monster that is special summoned, its effects being negated would be another one. But with how broken extra deck effects have become, being able to, like, cheat out monsters from there is just as much a boon as being able to special summon directly from your deck, which is the best way to get out cards, because as long as you have the resources for it, it can be made possible quite easily. So definitely a broken card, because of just how many broken extra deck monster effects there are now in Yu-Gi-Oh! And especially, I think, when you consider that, like, say something like, if VFG wasn't, you know, banned, which is, actually, no, I think there's a lot of banned, cards in, a lot of extra deck cards being banned, like, yeah, Ancient Fairy Dragon, if you want to go down that road. And Chaos Ruler, Christian Halki Fibrex, like, you could go into those combos. Yeah, that's a lot of, like, Entity Norden, I think that one's would be a fusion monster if I remember right. That's less than 6 stars. Yeah, 4 stars, but yeah. So yeah, if you're able to cheat out cards like Elder Entity Norden, then yeah. So it's more about the utility of being able to cheat out very powerful monsters and being able to use their effects to then be able to keep going. So definitely an interesting card, and definitely very broken. I think original Yu-Gi-Oh! Was definitely in a spot whereby a lot of cards were not only very broken, but also a lot of cards were very bad as well. So it was really just sort of a fundamental time for the game to figure out what it is, what it's trying to be, and how it's going to grow from there. So that's kind of just left us where we are today. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of the Power 9 that I've kind of come up with, going through and just considering all of the monsters, how broken they can be, and all of those other sorts of things. And until next time, I'll see you then.